we're going to go ahead and create the solution for this registration form. So I have a new file. I'm going to save it. I'm just going to call this registration form.html. Use my nice Sublime shortcut and get our boilerplate going. So when we're faced with a project like this, there's quite a few places that we could start. And the first thing that I'm going to do is add the form tag in. And then I'm also going to add this h1 just up top here. And we'll just put register. So let's go ahead and open our registration form here. I'm going to move it over. Okay, not quite there yet, but at least our h1 is looking good. So let's go back to Sublime, and let's start with the simplest thing, which would be this top level of inputs, the first name and last name. So we'll start with input, and those are type equals text. Oops. And let's give it a placeholder, which looks like it should be John. Let's do another one. Placeholder is Smith. And then we need to give 2 labels. So we could use either syntax for labels. I'm going to use the for, and so we'll call this first, and then we'll make sure we give an ID equal to first. And then this label will say first name colon, which will give us that. And then we need to do the exact same thing. Another label for last. This one will say last name colon. And then we need to give this ID equals last. So let's check in, see what we have. So far, so good. There's one small thing that we're missing, which is we haven't given these inputs a name. So I'll just give it the name first and name last. Great. So let's move on to the next chunk here. Oh, we're actually missing one thing, which is the validations. So while we're here, remember that first name and last name are not supposed to be blank. So in order to do that, it's very simple. We just add the required attribute on the inputs, required, and set that to be true. So I'm going to go ahead and expand this just so that we can see a little bit clearer what we're working on. So the next thing, if we consult the form here, is the gender radio button. So we need to have 3 radio buttons. So those are input, type equals radio, 3 of them. And if we take a look at what that gives us, first thing you'll see is that they are in line with the other elements, which is not actually what the form that I gave you is supposed to look like. So we have a few options to get things to behave. We can throw them in a paragraph, like this, just to add some spacing. Now we get them on a separate line. I'm just going to use a div here. There you go. You can see a div doesn't quite have the same spacing that a paragraph has. In the CSS video, we'll actually talk about what that spacing is. So now we need to go ahead and add our labels. And before we do that, let's actually give them the same name. So name will be gender here. Just go ahead and I should have used my shortcut here, which is to command click multiple cursors. So we give them name equals gender, and then let's give them each a value. So the first one, the value will be male. Second one will be female. The last one is other. And we refresh. We don't see any of that, of course, because that's just behind the scenes. So what we need to do is add in our labels. So we're going to want 3 labels. First one, we're going to say label for, and we'll just call this male. let's see, did we have colons here? No colons, so just male, and then ID equals male. Same thing, another label here. This one will be female, and then we're going to want to say ID, 4 equals female, and then we want to say ID equals female. So as you can see, building these forms, it gets a little tedious sometimes when you have a bunch of labels and a lot of nested things. You just have to be extra careful that you have everything corresponding correctly. So we want for other, and then we want to do ID equals other. So let's just check in on this, see what we have. All right, that looks great. We can only select one, which is what we want. Next thing we can move on to, let's go ahead and add the submit button at the end, just while we're here. So that's going to be input type equals submit. And let's just make sure our validation works. Yes, it does. Great, in good shape. So next up, we have an email and a password field, and those are on new line as well. So let's go ahead and add another div, and we're going to do an input. And this time it's type equals email. It's not just text. And the placeholder here was your email, which is admittedly not the best placeholder text, but we're going to stick to the image, make sure we follow the assignment. So input, type is email, placeholder is your email, and then we have another one for password. And that gives us the two inputs. Next up, we can either go with name, so we'll just say name is email here. And remember, in case you're confused, that name is purely used behind the scenes to figure out how to send the data. What should we send the data in the request under? What's the name of it? So in this case, whatever we type in this field is going to be called email. So we won't see an impact. Just in case, I do think this is one of the more confusing parts because it's not very visual. So this one, we'll say name is password. And then let's go ahead and add our labels. So just to mix it up here, I will use the other type of label, which is where we nest the data inside the label itself. So we'll say email colon, rather than the for and ID syntax, they work the same way. Let's do email and password. Let's be very precise. There are colons on both of them. Great. Let's save that. And there is one other thing that we should take a look at. Let's see, our validations are in place. Let's fill this in. No. So one thing that we're missing is we need to require the email. So we need to go to our email and add required. Now we refresh, fill these out, we leave email blank. If we type in a non-valid email, we get this error. Great. So far, everything looks good. We're going to come back to the bonus password validation at the end. Before we get there, let's move on to the birthday select.